Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Maitri. I'm kind of new to tabletop, so I'm very passionate about it. I'm learning to be a better GM, better player, and a better person, and I want to share some cool stuff with you that I've been learning. One of the things I personally really enjoy is learning about different theories and academic analyses behind behaviors and cultural norms and that kind of thing. The really cool thing about games is that there's a ton of theory behind game design and play. You've probably come across at least some of it here on YouTube. There's a lot of stuff about video games, but it applies to tabletop games too. So this is the first in what will hopefully become a multi-part series of sort of breaking this down for players and sort of how to GM across any system for certain kinds of players. If you have seen the types of players videos that exist in this space, there's a really good one by Matt Colville. There's a couple of others that I'll link below that I've come across as well. This sort of feeds into those. Because those will discuss different player types. What we're going to be discussing here is different kinds of fun that people can have at your table. So let's dive in. If you ask the average tabletop player, like the average Indier, what's the point? How do you win? How do you play? The answer will probably inevitably have to do with the point is to have fun. You win by having fun. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Gotta make sure everyone's having fun. And that is in itself a completely accurate statement. This whole channel, and arguably every tabletop channel and podcast, is about how to have fun better and how to stop gatekeeping different kinds of fun. But even with this example, you can see that every single channel is different. So does that mean every channel is wrong? No, it means that every channel is right. The challenge is that what's fun for me may not be fun for you. So what's fun for my veteran player may not be fun for my other veteran player. So even though you are committed to having fun and, which is a noble and righteous pursuit, it just may not land. What that means in the tabletop space is that if you are a GM, you've designed encounters that don't resonate with the players. Or if you're a player, you can't seem to engage with what's in front of you. So that's the context. Everyone wants to have fun, but everyone's idea of fun is different. To understand sort of the main theory we're going to be discussing, what we are talking about today is something called MDA, Mechanics, Dynamics, Aesthetics. MDA is a formal approach to understanding what drives engagement and fun in games. It was developed by Robin Hunick or Hunicke. I'm sorry, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, but I'll spell it for people. Mark LeBlanc and Robert Zubek, and they published a paper in 2004, which I will link below. So, what MDA tries to do is it attempts to bridge the gap between game design and development, game criticism, and technical game research, basically by quantifying how people consume games and the different kinds of fun they can get out of them. So there's 8 types of fun that they quantified. Number 1, sensation, which is your game as sense pleasure. Number 2 is fantasy, game is make-believe. Number 3, narrative, game is drama. Number 4, challenge, game is obstacle course. Number 5, fellowship, game is social framework. Number 6, discovery, game is uncharted territory. Number 7, expression, game is self-discovery. And number 8, submission, game is pastime. In doing research for this video, I found that, while people had explored and analyzed this framework in a lot of different capacities, and there's where a lot of the player archetypes and stuff have used some of this research for sure, the framework itself hasn't changed a lot. There's certainly some criticisms of it. It's pretty easily found on Wikipedia, and but like, this is just an interesting thing I wanted to share. Not our doctoral submissions, so if you want to go and look at the criticisms of this, you should. Ultimately, what it kind of means to me is that because the framework itself has not changed a lot, it's probably comprehensive enough to have the kind of nuanced discussions that are needed, at least in some capacity, if not fully. So a couple of things to note going into this. I'm going to try and articulate sort of what I think is most useful for tabletop GMs especially, but also players, like whether you play D&D or Call of Cthulhu or Mothership or The Expanse or like whatever system, doesn't really matter. A thing to remember is that basically everyone is a mix of multiple types of fun seekers, maybe even a mix of all of them. In fact, some of your best players are probably mixes of all of them, and what you prioritize can kind of change, based on just your mood or anything else. But it's not set in stone, and it's certainly not a box to put somebody in. All games that you play, you will see they prioritize different things too, and you'll find that, you enjoy certain games more than you enjoy other games perhaps. The other thing to understand is that most people are probably not familiar with this framework and the terminology associated with it, so they may not be able to articulate exactly why some things work and why others don't. They will just know like what they like and what they don't like. This is not a checklist of like, do this and don't do that. This is really just a framework to give you some prescriptions, some guidance on how to think about your games. And last but probably most importantly, none of these are any more or less valid than any others. There's only ones that you are more personally into. There's some that you probably prioritize at your table, that your players seek, but all that stuff just is. It's not inherently good or bad. It is at best more or less prioritized in different games, so you get that itch scratched differently. So diving in, speaking of scratching itches, number 1 is sensory pleasure. Sensory pleasure is the pleasure you get from having your various senses engaged, especially through sight, hearing, touch. You love seeing character art, ambient, atmospheric music, like really amps things up for you, makes it really immersive. You love beautiful book design, interesting minis, terrain, maps, handouts, artistic character sheets, even beautiful dice, If a PDF and online dice rollers just don't work for you, you're probably fairly into sensory engagement, and you might be a sensory pleasure seeker. But like I said, people don't need to be like, oh, I need my senses engaged in a tactile way. No, they'll just be like, I can't really do PDFs, man. I need a physical book. The other side of this is people who really don't care about sensory pleasure. This is probably where I am. I'm closer to this side of things. These are your total theater of the mind folks. They don't really need maps or minis or tokens, like, not because they dislike those things or anything. They just don't feel like they add anything to the game. if they exist, they are just like a fun little vestige. They are not necessary. Like I said, I kind of skew towards this side. I don't generally have sensory needs. I actually prefer PDFs to physical books most times because I find them more functional and easier for me to look things up. I prefer online and digital character sheets, but because again, that's more functional. Recently, I've started really digging maps and tokens for combat, like through owlbear radios, really simple. But again, that's purely mechanical, and I would be comfortable just having like a grid and the default tokens, But I know people who put hours into, how their maps look and what the minis look like, and they spend ages on mini painting and that kind of thing, and making tokens, custom tokens for online maps even. And they get so much joy out of it. And I love seeing that. But I always worry that my games will let those people down. So I make sure that when I use maps, which is sparing to begin with, I at least use good ones and not just like a grid with squares with like cover kind of shown with blocks, which would be fine for me, honestly. So I try to use like slightly nicer maps. So you can see already, even with just this first one, the core of what is considered fun is different. I would say that Call of Cthulhu is a very sensory pleasure game because it has tons of handouts, all kinds of things. I'd say older editions of D&D were too because of the maps and minis and hex scrolls and that kind of thing. I'd say most modern games, PBTA games probably are not. Even the more traditional settings like Dungeon World, I would say, are not really you don't need a sensory element for the game to land the way it's meant to land. Number 2, fantasy. Fantasy is the joy you get from immersing yourself into an imaginary world and just losing yourself there. So pretending to be someone you're not, just complete escapism. The fantasy seeker wants to feel like their character could be a real character in a world that could also be real. Their character is much, much more than just abilities on a sheet. They are, in fact, having things too mechanized could break the illusion of the fantasy seeker. This was a little tricky in RPGs as opposed to video games, because taking on a character via RP is obviously a very big part of the game. But if you're going into the game and making decisions for your character to flesh out their characterization, rather than with the intention of moving the game forward, fantasy might be more important to you than you think. Fantasy seekers want the world to feel like a living, breathing thing. Anything that helps the world feel a bit more like an alternate reality really helps. So having lots of details at your fingertips is always really helpful. Having a list of NPC names handy, or shop names if they enter a town. The day, on the day they're getting set up for a festival or a parade. Basically a world that exists outside of the characters that they can be a part of. Fantasy seekers are the ones that in your game will kind of look around shops or chat with locals in the tavern, or with no intention of really moving the plot forward. It's just fun for them to do. This might really make some of the other fun seekers struggle, so you as the GM might need to keep it under control a little and not let your fantasy seeker just kind of meander too far away from the plot. Having detailed settings with rich history and folklore, easy peasy, I know, but that's really what's going to allow your fantasy seekers to really immerse themselves in the illusion of this world. Knowing, how magic looks when they cast it is another story detail that might help. Those sort of explanations help the game world feel real. A game that has a high fantasy element, as an example, would be The Sims. The Sims is a great game that has this kind of world immersion. Number 3 is narrative. Narrative seekers take joy from experiencing a well-told story as it unfolds in front of them. This one gets a little bit tricky because it doesn't necessarily mean that they want to be part of the story, but they want to see sort of the highs and the lows and the conflict and the tension and the redemption and all of those things that kind of go into a great story. So a narrative seeker might be really happy playing a pre-gen in a published adventure because that adventure provides a story structure, story beats, conflict, and usually a very satisfying resolution. They may prefer linear story structures because that just fits together sort of tightly and neatly. This is your player who would much rather your game ends in a TPK instead of a campaign that just kind of fizzles out because of people scheduling issues and the story never really has a proper ending. On the other hand, you will have people who find the linear story structure boring, or they're really not happy not being the protagonist, and they want to avoid death more than they seek a sense of closure. It's really easy then to imagine that a narrative seeker wants to tell their own story, but again, that's not necessarily true, and you'll see that when we get to expression towards the end of the list. But these guys, they want to participate for sure, but not necessarily be the one that's the protagonist sort of driving it forward. They might, but they might not. What is certain with narrative fun seekers, though, is how they appreciate that everyone, PCs and NPCs, all have motivations to do the things that they're doing. They appreciate goals, they appreciate understanding the game's direction. They value clear story arcs, emotional plots. In video games, they might seek out that sort of 3-act story structure. In tabletop, it's a little bit more difficult, but I really see it as being much more about sort of clear elements of strong storytelling. A great example of a game with a really strong narrative piece is the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Certainly Cloud is a really big part of the story, but arguably it's not Cloud's story. The story itself is about Shinra and, the hubris of its executives. Cloud's just sort of the person that kind of, deals with all of that. Number 4. Challenge. Challenge seekers want to test themselves and they want to win. The game is a series of obstacles for them to overcome, and if they fail, they want to know that their failure was fair and that they'll be able to try again and have a chance to do better. In RPGs, it's super easy to think that this player will be satisfied with just combat and defeating combatants, but really it's a chance to kind of be good at anything that can be a goal to be succeeded at. So this can be investigations, puzzles, negotiations. Those are all great challenges too. Challenge seekers kind of get shit on these days. They're the min-maxers and the power gamers and the people who are trying to win. But here's where I really want to reiterate the point that I made at the beginning. This kind of fun is no less valid than your fantasy, your narrative, or sensory pleasure, which honestly is kind of trendy right now, as far as tabletop gaming goes. This is, like I said, just as valid, and remember, most people are a mix of several, and probably your best GMs and best players are a mix of all of them. And they know how to balance and enable different elements. Give a challenge seeker an obstacle and the tools to overcome it, and they'll be happy. Even social interactions, like I said, can be challenges if they're trying to negotiate something or they're trying to persuade someone. Because when you remember, is challenges not purely combat. It can be, but it isn't. Challenge just means that victory isn't assured at the outset. There's a risk of loss, and the challenge seeker can make use of skills, choices, and decisions to get to a victory. Too much random chance with no ability to change the outcome will drive your challenge seeker completely bananas. Like, they will not enjoy that. The challenge seeker likes their freedom to engage with problems in different ways and wants to feel that the victory is earned. Number 5, fellowship. Fellowship seekers value the social interaction and cooperation at the table. When you talk about player types and you think about your casual players, they probably fall into this category of fun seeker because they really do prioritize this. At an extreme example, the game kind of doesn't matter at all as long as it's a thing they are doing with their friends. They get to be part of a team, they get to contribute meaningfully. Another way that this can manifest is that players and their dynamic is the thing that matters. If you have a group that's mostly good, but you have one evil, backstabby character, that's probably going to mess with this person's sense of fun. It is challenging for them to separate that specific element of behavior as something that the character is doing and not something the player is doing. The fellowship seeker can click with mechanics that are built for inter-party cooperations and relationships, like the links mechanic in the Shadowrun and the Sprawl PBTA hack, bonds in Dungeon World, the party system in Warhammer Fantasy RPG, the 3rd edition. Like, all these will work really, really well for this kind of fun seeker. Number 6, this may be pretty short, but discovery. Discovery seekers like to explore and learn new things. They like to uncover things, and these are your players who love lore. They love being able to fill in the blank space in the map. They get real joy out of understanding the history of the world, the background of important NPCs, the reasons why things work the way they do. They just want to learn new things, and there's almost an element of conquest to it. It's a secret that's just waiting to be stumbled upon. They thrive on exploration, and when you introduce something new in a game, like a new location or a new NPC or ritual or whatever, the discovery seeker will have a ton of questions. To keep your discovery seekers engaged, pepper your world with little stashes of secrets, a little bit of lore here and ancient text there, like small treasures that, if someone needs to look for it to find, and for extra points, make it feel missable. Like something that has been overlooked until this very moment, until this specific player came along. Number 7, expression. Expression seekers find joy in being able to express themselves creatively and uniquely. This again is really interesting when it comes to tabletop because so much of it is about that kind of creativity. But expression seekers specifically, they want to be able to put something out into the world that is a reflection of their vibe, which can be as deep as, what they believe sort of politically and morally, or it can be purely aesthetic. Whatever it is important that it feels wholly unique to them. You'll see this in character backstories, ultimately, like these are your characters that are, like, not like the other kids growing up. They're kind of molded into this alternate version of normal. Ultimately, this person is really just trying to make something that is their own. Beyond the character that they create, it will really resonate with them to either have created part of the world that they are in, or have their character impact the world in a meaningful way. Do be careful about this, because when it interacts poorly with the fantasy seeker, what gives this player joy might give the fantasy seeker sort of trouble getting into the verisimilitude of the game, because now it's sort of being created by somebody else. In terms of mechanics that work really well for expression seekers, 13 to ages one unique thing is a really great mechanic for your expression seekers. Like, they'll probably get a lot out of that. And if you engage with their one unique thing through the game, that'll make them incredibly happy. It requires the player to trust the space that they're in and feel safe, because expression and sharing this kind of creativity is not easy. It requires some amount of vulnerability, and the act of creation is not easy. It can open you up to all kinds of criticism and judgment. It's scary, it's risky. But when people find a place that they can be creative without fear of judgment, that brings tremendous joy. So there's not much you have to do for expression fun seekers. You really just have to let them have this space. You need to make sure that they know that the spaces that they are in are safe and they are valued and validated in those spaces. And that will kind of allow them to create and express themselves the way that they want. Number 8, last but certainly not least, submission. Submission seekers enjoy just submitting to the thing and having it be kind of mindless. It's the pleasure you get from doing stuff that you don't really have to think too hard about. So, grinding mats in World of Warcraft, or chopping wood in New World, or farming in Stardew Valley, that kind of thing. Submission doesn't fit as well with tabletops, because even the simplest things, I would argue, take some intention. But I saw a great analysis in one of the great reference to analyses that I had read when I was doing research at the video, to beer and pretzel games. And that concept exists for a reason. Go to a dungeon, fight some baddies, get the treasure, go back to town, do it again next week, and the week after that, and the week after that. It's about as close to mindlessness as you can get in tabletops. It's easy to confuse these folks with challenge seekers, but the key difference is that these guys aren't really looking to be challenged. They want to kick in the door and not think too much about it. They want to have some laughs with some friends, and they don't want to have to work too hard to get to the goal. What works for them mechanically is either a system that people know like the back of their hands, or anything that's a super casual, easy session, like, oh dang, Bigfoot stole my car with my friend's birthday present inside. Right? Really any of the oh dang lasers and feelings or one-page RPGs, or Kobold's 8 by Baby is another really good one. Those are great for your submission fun sake. Yeah. So there you have it. 8 types of fun you can have according to the MDA framework. Again, not a hard and fast thing. This is really just a way for you to sort of think about games and how people engage with them. A lot of people seem to sort of postulate that there's like a right way to enjoy games, but I hope that you've seen that there's multiple ways that you enjoy games, and people are a mix, and no one way is objectively better than any other way. You as the GM can only ever make things more or less fun for different people by doing different things. So now you know the different ways people have fun. Okay, now what? What do you do with this information? Well, broadly, start to think about, do any of the styles resonate particularly strongly with you? Do you have any preferences and habits that reveal what styles you value the most? Which ones could you live without? If you're a player, you're going to use this information to try and figure out what resonates with you, so you can talk to a GM about incorporating more or less of something. The reality is, by the time you are watching this video or like thinking about the different kinds of fun in tabletops, trying to analyze yourself and your players, you've probably been running games for a while. You probably even have one, if not multiple regular groups. That means that you've developed a style. A GMing style is really just a fancy way of saying the types of fun you tend to emphasize in your games and how you do it. You've probably also already figured out what makes your players happy and what keeps them coming back, which means they're probably already having their types of fun and their needs met. So you probably don't need to make any big sweeping changes. The framework we've discussed here is really mostly useful for looking at smaller individual player-based decisions or answering questions that might come your way from your players, from fellow GMs, that kind of thing. It's really just a tool set to help you think about the games that you're running and playing in. To help recognize reasons why you do the things you do, or if you can sense a player becoming unhappy, you can try and figure out why. So yeah, that's all I have today. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching the video. I certainly enjoyed doing the research for it and making it. So thanks very much. I'll see you next time. Bye.